tutti, so bonjour à tous, and nice to see you all, and I feel truly very honored for this invitation and this amazing occasion in Torino, and to share with you this afternoon my research and my, in a way, personal journey on the EU-China relations. And this is actually new for me because in the way that I just started working back in China after nearly 24 years across Europe, but also in Australia. So it's really exciting for me. For the first time working at the Chinese university, Zhejiang University, which is on the picture, we are a partner, I heard from Giovanni, with University of Torino. So I really hope that many of you would have the chance to come to visit me, visit our campus in Hangzhou. It's the top university in China, around the top 30, we hope, in the world. And I'm in the School of Public Affairs, which has the Department of Political Science, for which I'm the professor in. And the city of Hangzhou is really also a very historical city, and both for the ancient history, but also for China's digital economy. Some of you probably heard a simple guy called Jack Ma. Any of you heard about him? Yeah, who is the founder of Alibaba Group. So he is actually from Hangzhou, and also Hangzhou is famous for another Italian guy named Marco Polo. So he came in the 12th century, and this year marks the 700 years of his death. So this is a very important moment. And when he went to Hangzhou in the 12th century, a lot of things have changed. Obviously, he said this is the most beautiful city in the world. I haven't checked the original wording, but that's what we're told about Marco Polo's impression. So I need to change. I know I need to change. From my own personal experience, I have been also very fortunate to be the Marco Polo reversed. And I came to Europe in the year of 2000, started as an international student in Rotterdam, in the Dutch city of Rotterdam. And my first encounter of the Netherlands actually also, when I took this souvenir picture in Volendam, I was made the first kind of historical encounter between Europe and China. If you look at the picture, do you know what this is? This is porcelain, right? So in English sometimes we would call it China as well, because it's originally made or invented in China. So porcelain, and this is a Dutch porcelain. Do you know what's the name for this Dutch porcelain? I'm sure our distinguished colleague Jean-Michel will know. I feel very humbled speaking in front of him. And the specific name of this, anyone have been to the Netherlands or have visited a small town near Rotterdam called Delft? Have you heard about Delft? There's a very good university called Delft University of Technology. And this particular china is called Delft Blue. And the reason called Delft Blue because the Dutch, together with some European countries, were importing a lot of porcelain from China. However, it became very expensive and it's very fragile to transport. And also a lot of the porcelain, if you import it from China at that time, and they are full of Chinese motifs, Chinese landscape, Chinese people, Chinese flowers, etc. So at that time, to have a porcelain from China is considered as luxury goods. Like nowadays, Chinese are buying Prada, Gucci, and all this. So if you have Prada, at that time means you have a porcelain from China. So some Dutch cities begin to produce porcelain, like some other European countries, as I said. And this is a Delft Blue produced later on in Europe. As you can see, this particular Delft Blue was made for tulip flowers. And so this appreciation of the mutual culture occurred centuries ago between Europe and China. And I was very fortunate, as I said, to be an international student in Europe. I call it the Triple E experience. I was for many years as an Erasmus student in different European countries. I studied actually in the Erasmus University of Rotterdam, and I experienced the change from the Dutch kuna or the Italian lira to euro, which obviously made an important fundamental change for European integration. And I benefit from the low-cost carriers like EasyJet and Ryanair. So I call it the triple E experience of my life in Europe. So the encounter, as I said, from Europe to China has a long tradition and a long history, and I just want to give you some background on how China sees the world. And many people say China is a nation. Some people call it a civilization state or state. For a while, China has this very China-centric viewpoint, being the middle as the kingdom of the heaven, and then with a surrounding states, a very hierarchical system of looking at the world. We call the hierarchy the tributary state. Some of you know. I won't bore you with the historical Tianxia system. Some of you may have studied in your degree courses here or elsewhere, but it's certainly a very important way of China looking at other countries. And for a long while, this was the default look how China sees the other world. And of course, that has influence in Europe, like Xinhua City. If you see the next picture, you will see a lot of the so Xinhua City and also the Mandarin system. So any of you heard about the Mandarin system? Mandarin, what does it mean, Mandarin? It's not an orange, what I'm talking about. Very good. You have some good students here. So Mandarin is a very old English word. It's for fonctionnaire in French and also for senior civil servants. The reason they call civil servants Mandarin is because China had one of the first civil entrance examination, so concours to become a civil servant. So Mandarin is they call it in this way. So we can see Europe and China influence each other from the historical point of view. And here you can see a colleague, Michael Yohunda in France, outlined different stages of EU-China or Europe-China engagement. For a period from the 15th century, from the 16th century to 19th century, Europeans were influenced by China. Then China was influenced by Europe, and then both parties enter a period of tension, a period of wars, and of course, then we have the post-war interaction and engagement between the two parties. So today, this afternoon, in the next 18 minutes or so, let's look at this in more details. And here I must say, the pioneers for Europe-China engagement are some of the very famous Italians. We talk about Matteo Ricci, very important. Marco Polo, also very important. So a lot of them came as missionary, as Jesuit to China, then later became very influential in Chinese system, in the imperial court, played important roles as translators, astronomers, and also were very important for cartography, making the maps, etc. in China. So that's really important. And likewise, some of the Chinese objects made it to Europe, and I mentioned about porcelain already, but there are many others, Chinese design, Chinese products, Chinese teas, etc. What became the fashionable sense in the European societies, among the royal families, for instance. And you here, you can see the very important landscapes influenced by the Chinese way of the art of vivre during that period. And I was recently in Brussels, and in Laken, which is the royal palace, they still have a Chinese pavilion. We hope with some Belgians, friends, can make the pavilion again glorious. So, of course, we do not need to forget the historical encounter through ancient Silk Road by land, and where the trading routes for all of these wonderful products came to China, but also went all the way to Rome and other parts of Europe. And this obviously is important, this historical legacy, as China is now using this rhetoric for its own international developments through the Belt and Road Initiative, for instance, launched in 2013. So we have the land-based Silk Road, and we also have the historical maritime Silk Road. Obviously, very famous sea voyage was made by Admiral Zheng He in the 15th century. There's this book, some people can say it's full of fiction, Some people thought that was an eye-opening book, and on China's maritime Silk Road expedition. And already you can see at that time there's trade deficit between the two parts, which I will talk a little bit later. So, during that period, we can see China and the West and China and Europe had no tension, or at least no direct tension or direct war. Neither China nor Europe sees each other as enemy or as major geopolitical threat, and purely because the training of distance between the two parties. And we saw the Europeans, colleagues, explorers, Portuguese, Italian, etc., came to China in the 16th century. And we also see the influence from China on Europe through these important philosophers and thinkers in Europe at that time describing China. So I said the trade deficit existed already long time ago, and we can see this important dialogue in the 18th century between King George III and the emperor of the Qing dynasty at that time, Emperor Qianlong. So this was a letter written by the King George III to the emperor himself to say that, for China to kind of buy some products from the United Kingdom or from England at that time. And this, you can see the response from Qianlong to King George III through the special envoy, Lord Macartney. So he said, there's nothing we lack as your principal envoy, Lord Macartney has observed, processed all things we have never felt much so on strange or ingenious objects, and we have no use for your countries. So this, you can see, it's very, as I said earlier, this China-Sino-centric viewpoint, and China is very largely self-sufficiency and does not need the exports from England at that time. And China, on the other hand, was exporting a lot to Europe. Then we can see later what happened is the Opium War, the trade of opium. I will not go into detail, and this obviously changed very much to China's course. China became, in a way, by force, entered the modernity, as some scholars have said, from European influence mainly. And this has huge impact, obviously, on the Chinese international relations, China's engagement with the outside world. Many people describe it, or as we are told in China, the century of shame and humiliation. And this has both tangible and intangible impacts on China's and on the Chinese leaders. So after the Opium War, we can see China had a lot more influence from Europe, from the West, and from a historical kind of China-centric viewpoint to be able to signify the barbarian invaders to become a source of humiliation, and this material and spiritual pride gradually disappeared, and what came to the reality of the modernization and also the modernity after the Opium War. So China was eager to learn from the West, and there's a Chinese important saying that, why we need to preserve the Chinese way of living, the Chinese way of thinking, we need to use the Western theories, the Western thoughts for a practical approach. So let's do a fast forward, and I want to move to the relation between China and Europe in more contemporary times. So after the People's Republic of China was founded in 1949, we can see we had soon different stages of the Chinese new foreign policy under the new People's Republic. So we had three stages. One is the more ideological stage from the 50s to the 70s, and then we have a more proactive way of looking at how China should engage with the world. Obviously, for the first stage, the more ideological stage, China was more or less isolated from the rest of the world. There was no UN membership, and at that time, China's engagement or the global viewpoint was more inward-looking, and China also was obviously in the camp of the Soviet camp or the socialist camp in a way, in a confrontational mode or approach with the Western country. However, the Chairman Mao at that time had this theory of the three worlds, the first world, which is the hegemonic powers, the second world, which is the emerging country, and the developing world. So China's view was to be accommodating or balancing power between the first and the second world. However, at that time, the foreign policy was very cautious, as said, due to insecurity and also the concern that about the hegemonic and imperialism approach by the other parts of the world. I will not go into detail on the first stage. And obviously, very importantly, the ping-pong diplomacy played a very important role, as you know, between the two sides and between China and the US, and with China's gradual opening up with the world, particularly with a warming relationship with the US, its approach is also being gradually shifted to become more open, and also started to have diplomatic relations with Europe as well. Particularly, we can see here with Western European countries from the 70s onwards already. So, and also China accommodates both East and Western Europe in its the three worlds theory. And from the 79 onwards, with China's gradually open up and the reform policy, we can see that China's global foreign affairs has emerged more rapidly, and that has huge implication for the rest of the world and also for China's diplomacy. And particularly, China realized it needs a peaceful external environment for the development, and the attitude is towards more opening up. So, why China became more open or more collaborative with the rest of the world? There are some internal and external reasons. As I said, for the economy to have a peaceful environment, and also China wants to have a very good self-image. It also has domestic pressure, like Susan She called the fragile power, the fragile superpower, so it also needs external environment to satisfy its domestic audience. We can see the timing of development is really important, because you need to adapt to the changing global governance and global standards. You need to be part of the standard setting in order to maximize your benefits, and also the expectation from other parts of the world on China's newly gained economic status in the world. So a number of new initiatives, like the Belt Road Initiative, you heard probably in the media since 2013 onwards. So let's now focus on the relationship between Europe and China in the lands. And we can see a long period of engagement or exchange between the two parties. Next is really important, because in 1975 China formally had a diplomatic relation with the European Union, with its predecessor. And also the first commissioner's visit to China occurred in 1975. So next year, 2025, will be the 50 years of diplomatic relation between the EU and China. We can see in the 80s already the economic and trade became popular. However, it started at a very low base. China was the 31 exporter to Europe. And now, do you know which place China has as an exporter to the EU? It's the number one exporter to the EU. So US is EU's first exporter. So China is the combined biggest trading partner for the EU in terms of trade in goods. So you can see over the 50 years, at least the trade relationship has grown very significantly. Already, we said, since Deng Xiaoping's sudden visit in 1992, China changed its approach to the world to become very open, to become more active in the global engagement. And the same year, obviously, for EU, we had the Treaty of Maastricht, which facilitated the further integration. So both parties were up and onwards for opening up and for international collaboration. 1993, very important because the European Commission has its first Asia strategy, focused mainly on China because of China's economic opportunities. So for the EU, for instance, China offered two opportunities. One is for trade and business opportunities, and the secondly, very important, is on EU governance, or the soft power, or the normative power of the EU. So the normative power export is to do with rule of law, environment, poverty reduction, and also science and technology. So EU wanted to, in a way, to help China to transform. So in 1995 to 2002, we saw a number of very important communication or documents between the two parties. We see the EU has a number of policy documents focusing on cooperation with China. And the bilateral summit system was also established in 1998. The first summit was held in London, and we also had sectoral dialogues across different areas of collaboration. And China became Europe's second trading partner after the US. So 2003, I said it's a very sweet spot for EU and China. And we had a lot of visits, we have a lot of declarations by the two parties, and some of the scholars, they call it the honeymoon period between the EU and China. And I was talking to our colleague Giovanni, for instance, Romano Prodi was very important at that time in the engagement between Europe and China. So why we call it the honeymoon period? Because you can see the EU launched its policy paper on China, what we call a maturing partnership, shared interests and challenges. So I want you to focus very carefully on the wording, because if you can see the policy paper, it's a maturing partnership, so it's going to depth. We know mature is always good for food and wine, right? Mature wine is a good thing. And they put interest before challenges. So for the EU, interests are higher than challenges in the bilateral relation. And for the first time, China also responded that with its policy paper, and probably until now the only foreign policy paper for China for a single country or region, as China's EU foreign policy paper in 2003 on the EU. And as I said, in addition to high-level people like Romano Prodi and Berlusconi and some other leaders, we have over 206 high-level visits from the EU to China in 2004 alone. So you can see the frequency of the exchange. And it's also the first time the China's premier at that time, Wen Jiabao, came to Europe, came to Brussels to meet the EU decision makers. So we can see the honeymoon period is a milestone in the bilateral relations. However, we all know, those who had honeymoon, the honeymoon is usually very short. It's sweet, but very short, right? Once you have the honeymoon, the day-to-day marriage, the travels, all of these will revert to you and create challenges. So you can see the honeymoon was short. Immediately after the honeymoon, we had a period of tension or uncertainties in bilateral relations, and mainly to do a number of reasons. One is the unavoidable or avoidable trading issues in terms of trade deficit. You can see the scale of the trade deficit really escalated in just a decade. So Europe wanted to have the trade more balanced with China. For Chinese, we were very kind of hurt or in our mind with the arms embargo. We thought, Europe could lift its arms embargo. I think at one stage, probably Chancellor Schroeder almost said that we could lift it any time, but it didn't happen due to some tension in Taiwan. And However, despite this, we can see the wording in the policy documents. In 2006, you can see another document called Closer Partners and Growing Responsibility. So still partners first, then responsibility. However, a DG trade document in that year already shifted a bit the tone of approach. You can see EU-China trade and investment, the title is competition and partnership. So what is before competition, then partnership. So we can see already there's a shifting in the wind towards the bilateral relations. And we know what happened in 2008. That was a not easy year for China, because that was supposed to be a very important year for China with the Beijing Olympic Games, and China's, some people call it the show, the global show. But in Europe, particularly in Paris and in London, was quite not the way that many in China would have expected. And you can see there was huge incidents on the street of Paris where a Chinese disabled torch relay were kind of damaged. And on the way in China, there was a way of boycott towards France in particular, against French luxury goods like Louis Vuitton, but also supermarket like Carrefour and all these. So 2008 was a year of tensions between the two parties, and also the freezing point in the bilateral relation. Why we call it? Because it's the first time the EU-China summit was cancelled. At very short notice, it was supposed to be in Lyon, as France was holding the European Union's presidency, and everything was organized. And I was in touch with some of the colleagues from the region Home Alps, which is the Lyon's city located. They were really looking forward to this important summit. Why is it so? Because that was the beginning of the global financial crisis, and China had a very important role in helping EU's recovery. That was the place. So we can see the summit was cancelled, and it's the freezing point. And next year, however, China wanted to look at this relation again, and China's Premier Wen Jiabao went to Europe the year after, during the Chinese New Year, or before Chinese New Year, to visit Europe. And he visited a number of European countries: Germany, Switzerland, UK, and Spain. So if I come to ask you, what do you think these four countries share in common? Why Premier Wen Jiabao choose these four countries? Very good. I think you really have very good students. They are the neighbors of France. They all have been a land or sea border with France. And so at the end of the tour, he was asked by the journalist, why did you choose these four countries and why not France? Because France traditionally is very important for China's relation with Europe. It's the first major European country to recognize the People's Republic of China in 1964, so one among the first, And so Wen Jiabao said, I actually flew over the sky of France 4 times during my trip, but I didn't go there, but everyone probably knows the reason. And so this was a very important kind of phenomenon for EU-China relation at that time. Because at the same time, when China and France were having difficult times, a number of European countries have launched their own engagement policy with China. For instance, the UK policy on working with China, it was calling actually for closer partnership. So that's what some scholars in Europe, they call the divide and conquer policy or approach between China and the EU. And here I listed the François Goodman and John Fox paper in 2009, looking at the different approaches and the kind of relation between Europe and China through a more analytical lens on the different member states on their China policy. So you can see what they call is, they think China is pick and choose in Europe. So we can work with France, we can work with Italy, and to maximize the benefits. So they also call it the divide and the conquer approach, and what they have is divided the different member states into different categories. Some are more pro-China, some are more pro-EU approach, some are more hardliners on China, some are less care. They are more kind of European followers, so more follow the other people's views. So I will not go in details, but here you can see the division. They put different European countries in different categories. The more hardliner are the assertive one, the more free trading people, they are more accommodating, and then some other smaller countries tend to have more softer, or they follow more Brussels guidelines. So, and they later did another follow-up report. So if you're interested in their approach, I would recommend you read their publications. So here we can see the trading issue is really the cornerstone of the bilateral relation. And despite the challenges, the EU and China, the trade has grown and grown over the few decades. And we can see China is the number one exporter to Europe, and second in terms in terms of EU's exports globally, China is after the US. US is number one destination for European exports. And in terms of investment, however, China's investment in Europe is increasing, but still quite limited. It's about 8% of the total foreign investment in the EU, while the US, for instance, has a much larger share. It has around 20% of the EU's inward investment came from Europe. So investment is still lagging behind. However, trade is very important, in goods at least. In trading services, US has a bit more advantage in terms of trading and service. Of course, US is a very strong advanced service producing nation. So if we look at in more details between the two parties, we can see the shifting directions over the last few decades. So we can see that already from the 1995, the first documents, to the later 1996, through all the way to the honeymoon period, and also to the different policy documents from the EU. I use the traffic light system here. You can see the traffic light in terms of good, on hold, and more, in a way, more challenging. And you can see here, the more, as we move towards nowadays, there's more tension in the bilateral relations. We can see the maturing partnership to closer partners, to growing responsibilities, and to have competition first before partnership. And then to EU-China strategic outlook, which put the four definitions of China. So I want to ask, why do you think this is changing this way? What do you think? Why these wordings have changed quite significantly? Any of you? Please.
Because China has grown so much, and EU is also US ally, so that is like a challenge for the EU, because China is a strategic partner, but the US are also one, so they are in a difficult situation.
Anyone else would like to share your views? Please.
Maybe because of Xi Jinping leadership in China.
Okay.
Start in those years.
Okay, so leadership approach, yeah? Anyone else? Please.
It's the rise of China, market of China, and geopolitical ambitions of China, self interest of China is rising a lot. Expansionist policy.
Okay, so China's regional and the global engagements, yeah?
And Europe is declining.
US also partnership of US with different nations, multilateral relations of US.
Very good. Anyone else would like to share your view? Anyone from that corner? Okay. So I want to ask, what do you think? Because earlier we have this picture by John Fox and François Gutmann. They look at in 2009, how these things were looking from the different member states. Obviously, a lot have changed. The UK is not in the EU anymore, so it's now 27 member states. If we still have these categories of 4 types of blocks in the EU, one is what they call assertive industrialists who can stand and say no to China. One is the more ideological free traders who value very importantly the relation with China for business and trade. And one is the European followers, so which says they are more follow whatever Brussels is saying. And last not least is accommodating mercantilists, which really places China an important partner to have good relationships, so that can help the overall economic and the trade partnerships. So these are the 4 categories they used at that time, and that's what the definition or the kind of the grouping of the different countries. So how do you see this has changed now? Any major change in your mind or shift? Particularly, what do you think Italy, where Italy sits? In my class, I always use this exercise for students to look at how they, if you are a policy analyst for European Council for Relations or European Policy Center, you probably would do this on a day-to-day basis to monitor the different approach. Yes, please. Yeah.
I would say that maybe that is not so much support right now because it decided recently to, for example, to exit from the revolution. So
Yeah, because I think some people were hoping Italy will vote against the EV, bill, but Italy actually supported it. Yeah. So you think Italy is, which one do you think it's more assertive industrialist, or you think it's, yeah, or the European followers? So
I mean, I'm not so sure, but I would say maybe more near that industrialist, but also like in the middle of the
depending on the area of interest, right? Okay. What do you think France sees? France had a different, sitting under Chirac and under Sarkozy, because Chirac was a lot more favorable, whereas Sarkozy obviously had this tension. And the same with Germany under Chancellor Schröder and Chancellor Merkel. So what do you think these 2 major powers, it's France and Germany? Yes?
Sorry, I have a question. For Germany, for example, do you think that now is more near the development for traders?
Why do you think that way? Okay. Thank you, yes? Yeah, even with a foreign minister from the Green Party, you think they are more, yeah? Yeah, yeah. Okay. Why do you think this changed? Or Do you think it's BMW, Mercedes, and all these companies, or some other reasons?
I'm sure.
Okay, thank you. What about France? Anyone think,
I feel like France is more liberal, but they are also more critical of China. So I guess they would sit in the ideological free traders part.
Yeah, but towards more assertive, right? Or towards, yeah.
More assertive, I would say.
An easier question, what about Hungary? What do you think Hungary is? Do you think Hungary changed? Yes, sir? Yeah.
Very the same position we are getting the regulations in China. For example, the BYD companies, the car manufacturers come to China, we are still in the structure right now.
Yeah. So Hungary is now becoming a very important partner for China. So I would agree as accommodating. What about Baltic states? Estonia, Latvia, and then Lithuania, where do you think they sit? We can see before they are in the European followers, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia. Do you think there's a change? They were part of the European followers. So European follower means that they follow whatever Brussels says. Yes? Yeah, I think it's at least probably for Lithuania, had a kind of tough period with China, with Lithuania's relation with Taiwan. Obviously, there was a period of tension, on the two sides. When I was actually in Australia, I met with the Lithuanian president. He was on a state visit to Australia, to Melbourne and Sydney and Canberra. And one of the things he was trying to do was to kind of ask Australian counterparts how to deal with the tension with China, because Australia had a similar tension with Lithuania. So I think certainly certain parts of Baltics. And Spain, finally, what do you think Spain is? Or Poland? Spain and Poland, what do you think? So these are very important powers. Any students from Spain or Poland here? Oh, what do you think? And on the back, yeah, maybe. In Poland, do you think Poland, which category do you think we would?
I think that's right for assertive investors.
Poland.
There are so many investors, Chinese investors.
Yeah. So you think they are more assertive, they are more hardline?
Yeah, it's hard to approach Poland.
Yeah.
Because of the EU, the government
Yeah. And Poland traditionally has a very strong transatlantic bond, right? Anyone at the back? I think someone was raising their hands. Or did I misread? Okay. So I think overall, I think you're pretty correct if we have to do this assessment. Okay? So maybe Giovanni, in your class, you can do the exercise again. That will be really interesting. So we already see the changing wording. The changing wording, I think the policy documents really shows the kind of temperature in Brussels, but in the national capital. But equally, we can see some of the cartoons. I really like cartoons. In how political cartoons they reflect. Well, what do you think these cartoons tell you? Some are Chinese cartoons, some are more international cartoons, international media. The Chinese cartoon it's very easy, for to tell. For instance, this one, China and Europe on the same boat, China and Europe riding the same bicycle, going to the same place. What about the other cartoons? What do you think they tell? Yeah, so there's a feeling in the EU that China is buying and buying European assets, European products. So sometimes there's a concern, right? So taking advantage of that. Yeah. Anything else? What do you think this is? This means? Or this?
The third one is greedy and scary. One side for the traders and another side using this normal community.
Yeah.
If you see their perspective, so it's one kind of animal with giant.
So it shows, I think there's here, you can see it's older gentleman, so it's aging Europe, vis-a-vis a strong, dragon, a harsh dragon, and you can see the trade. It's in a briefcase, so trading relation, it's a trade relations, and it's a forced marriage, so to say, you're on the same bed, but think about differently. And here, you can see it's also, they say, China is a panda, but a dragon, so they have the two sides of the nation, right? So some of the cartoons, they reflect, how Europe or some of the perceptions or what China thinks is misperceptions of the bilateral relations. However, that's gradually become very important, kind of what we feel, in EU's approach. So what we feel that, also, when I talk to colleagues, it's what they say, it's a China illusion, they think, EU's engagement has been quite unconditional engagement, giving a lot, receiving quite few, and the win-win, some people joke, is China win once, China win twice, not a win-win, like a mutually winning. There's also the feeling in Brussels, there's the summit fatigue, you have a lot of discussion, a lot of talks, but little have been transformed into reality. That's to do particularly on the limitation of Europe's normative power on China in transforming China into the way that the EU would have wanted. So from a quite naive liberalism, now we can see there's a shift of geopolitical realism. And sadly, from China, we also feel there's growing mistrust and growing distrust and lack of confidence on the collaboration. And we can see in the areas of technology, in the area of neighborhood, so the regional neighborhood, and in the global governance and the global governance models. So hereby, I quoted the European Parliament, we can see EU needed to be more realistic, be more assertive and multifaceted when it comes to approach with China. And also the illusion, you can see it's very obvious in this policy document. So we need a clear departure. So that's what we have nowadays on the EU's policy or official view on China. We have the full view, we have a cooperation partner with China on peace and security, climate change, working on Africa, on sustainable fishing, etc. In this area, China is very important cooperation partner. We have also negotiating partners in the world trade reform, in the transport system, and all these European global gateway, for instance, with China BRI, so we are negotiating partners. And the third way is economic competitor. So China's industry policy is really the important challenge for the EU's exports, and how we can have a level playing field for trade. How do we ensure that R&D cooperation is reciprocal? This is the competitive mindset. And last but not least, And more importantly, I think that's the most challenging part, is the systemic rivalry. So the governance model system is very different between one another. So the China solution, the China way of global governance, the norms and values are very different from the European way. So that's why the EU call it the systematic rivalry. So the two parties are competitive. So for many Chinese policymakers and scholars, they also feel this is very contradictory. So how could you be a strategic partner, which on paper EU, China are, and a systematic rival at the same time? So this, we're viewing in China, at least some of them feel this is really hard to understand, or hard to think this is not coherent or not. So from this change in the policy approach or direction, or this departure from this more naive approach, according to the EU, to the more geopolitical realism, we can see a number of the important actions have been taking place in Europe. And we can see a number of important policy documents or strategy have been published in the EU. And some of them, like the 2021 Global Gateway Strategy, in the eyes of some scholars and think tankers, this is directly or indirectly targeted at China's Belt and Road Initiative. And these are just some of the changes in recent years. And more recently, we can see in Europe, there are some other legislations, there are some other schemes or policy tools, particularly looking at collaborations in trade, in investment, and in foreign direct investment, for instance, and increasingly in the areas like science and technology. So, for instance, I've been told there's some policy framework already on research collaboration, R&D collaboration between EU and outside world. So obviously none of them is written that targeted on certain countries, but in the eyes of China or some Chinese scholars, these have a very strong preference or have a strong focus with the China element. Giovanni, am I running out of time?
No.
Why you're not going to give me a lot of pressure?
Not yet.
Okay, good. And so why we try to understand why there's a shift in this approach. Obviously, we see the shift in global economy and the fundamental change in the international relations structure. Obviously, China is becoming an important partner. So for Europe, I think it's the worsening of regional environment, particularly in the case of Russia, Ukraine. And I read just now, 2 days ago, that Latvia just introduced a compulsory national service. I think this has major importance or major reality change for the EU. So this long-term peace broken on the continent of Europe obviously had an important impact on the EU-China relations. And we can see also the configuration of actors and the roles. And I've been working with a colleague from Zhejiang University on the role mismatch, and role tension, for instance. So we can see before the global financial crisis, the role was matched. So the role of China and the role of EU. So the EU is the more socializer role, asking or socializing China to the global system. So China was more on the receiving side, being a socializee. And after the global financial crisis and before the G20 Hamburg summit, we can see there's already the role tension. There are competing roles, competing views. However, there's still respect for different civilization, different development paths. However, we can see now what we have is more role mismatch. There's competition for leadership, and as partners, as competitors, as rivals, as the EU policy has put it up. So how do we see each other then? From the perception point of view, we can see. From the perception point of view, China still sees EU and China both as important regional global powers. However, China wanted EU to be an autonomic or strategic autonomy, but in reality, Europe is not in a way standing towards the strategic autonomy it's claimed to. And China, on the other hand, sees itself as the global champion for win-win partnership, for multilateralism, for peace and stability. On the EU side, we feel that EU sees itself as not declining but reconfigurating, and China as a new neo-mercantilist power and economic competitor, and China as systemic rival, and the EU as a global technology and nomadic power. So that's in terms of perception. And in terms of role, China sees itself still as a newcomer, as still a developing country, and but a civilization leader in the global economic governance. And China wants to be more active in normative area, particularly in technology standards and setting. Now we're talking about AI and others. And EU sees EU's role still as a very important ally and a very important kind of balancing power between China and the US, particularly in this trilateral triangulation of the relationship, and wants to see EU become a strategic autonomy power. And the EU views itself, the role is to China still as a partner, but sees China as systemic rival, sees China's challenge, and also a challenge not only economic but also in technology. And I think the EU also agrees with its role as mediator and leader by example. So this normative power is important. So if we look at the trade in recent years, despite the challenges, despite the crisis in COVID, we can see the trade still increased. There was one decline in the height of COVID, but the trade, the export-import between the two parties are still growing, and so which I think is a good signal that both parties are still value the importance of the economic relations. In terms of investment, we can see there's still growing investment from one and another. Despite the tension, many Chinese companies are still interested in investing in Europe. And I think the EU strategy, I was talking to the Belgian ambassador to China, he said the EU's future strategy is in Europe, with Europe, for Europe. So meaning what China did in the 80s and the 90s, attracting foreign investment like Volkswagen, the EU wants this reverse, this same time. Invest in Europe, creating European jobs, and produce in Europe. However, there's a major issue is how the individual member states formulates its approach. We think in China, we feel that there's the concern about public opinion, but also the think tank approach. So that's in the case of Germany, how the national role conception is being formulated through the different sources. The challenge part is really the public opinion, which we see that across Europe, this is an area of concern. Even in Hungary, the public opinion is not really that high. So that's really a concern for the Chinese stakeholders, so investing in public diplomacy and all this. There was also concerns about the wolf warrior policy of China, etc. I will not go into details due to the time limitation. So looking beyond, looking behind, what we have, I still, hopefully I'm still optimistic, although most of my colleagues are more pessimistic on that. And we see that the latest statements from both sides, from the China side, obviously that the Chinese leadership is very supportive for European strategic autonomy, and in view of the transatlantic relationship. Obviously, this will be really interesting in a few days' time. The new president of the US, how this may impact the transatlantic ties and impact strategic autonomy. But for the Chinese perspective, the strategic autonomy is really important and we value. Even we know that strategic autonomy may bring a side effect like decoupling or de-risking in certain areas. Strategic autonomy also can bring a negative implication, but we want to support EU's strategic autonomy. Whether this exists, whether this is realistic, I would really like to ask your opinion. Do we still have European strategic autonomy? We had a conference recently in China with a number of European colleagues. Their answer was no, it doesn't, it's dead already, but I was hoping a bit more optimistic view. And on the other hand, we can see that we need to look at the representation of the role and the strategic approach. So the mutual conception, mutual roles, we need to be more realistic, more pragmatic. We need to build on the interdependence on the two parties, particularly in areas of mutual interest, mutual strategic focus like climate change, debt relief, and third country collaboration. I think the third party cooperation is really important, for instance, in Southeast Asia, in Latin America, and in Africa. Fourthly, I think bilateral networks is really important. And with the civil society, think tank dialogues, etc. My university and myself are actually part of the new EU-China think tank dialogue. So we really want to bring this two dialogues back into action. We need these kind of platforms. And the EU is actually investing in two other strategic networks on independent knowledge on China. One is Reconnect China, led by Ghent University, and another network is led by Marix in Germany, and both of them are focusing on producing independent knowledge on China. Ironically, one of them is more China, I wouldn't say China friendly, but more neutral, and one is more China critical approach. So it will be interesting to see the two research networks, what they produce. Each of them has a funding of 4 million euros to work on the next 3 years on China. And last but not least, it's really, I think, that the key area I want to promote is the importance of people-to-people dialogue and also the building of knowledge and capacity and competencies. And this is something I realize, and I'm really concerned and worried because there's a lack of understanding on each side. And in Europe, there's a declining knowledge on China, Chinese language, China studies. I toured recently to, a month ago, I went to Catholic University Leuven in Belgium. I went to Humboldt University Berlin, and you can see a sharp decline, 70% decrease of people studying Chinese in degree courses in this top university. I mean, KU Leuven is among the first university to offer study Chinese for centuries. And so this is worrying. On the other hand, you see Japanese studies on the rise, so how can we make Chinese studies more attractive again? It is an issue. The German Academic Cooperation Service, DAAD, published a paper recently, again highlighting the lack of German competence on China, saying that we need more German youth, German students, scholars who can understand contemporary China, speak the language, which will help the bilateral exchange. So I heard that in Torino, you still have studies or programs on China, so I hope we can continue this and have this collaboration between the two sides. I think exchange is really important, as we all say, we can agree to disagree. So agree to disagree is already a very important step under the current geopolitical situation. So with that final word, I want to thank you very much for your attention, and as the editor-in-chief for the Asia-Europe Journal, I also hope some of you would follow our journal. We are an SSCI journal focused on Asia-Europe interaction, probably the only one focused on Asia and Europe. And in my university, we also have another journal called Journal of Chinese Governance, focused on more global governance, Chinese governance. Both are top-tier journals, so we will welcome your contribution and welcome you to follow us. So thank you again, Giovanni, and thank you again, your team, for
Okay, so thank you, Wei. Thank you for
for your lecture, and now we can, I think we have 50 minutes, we can open the floor to your comments and questions, so you have the opportunity the chance to ask Professor Wei Shen everything you have never dared to ask about China and Euro-politics and about the relations between EU and China. So please, the floor is yours. Yes, comments, questions, and so on.
Hello. So my question is.
Can you introduce yourself first?
Oh, please, sorry. I'm Marco Mazza. I just wanted to ask a question about soft power in particular, because as you've mentioned, Japanese studies seem to be becoming more and more popular in Europe, whereas it doesn't seem to be the same trend for China and Chinese studies and cultural studies. Why do you think that is? What is it that is missing into China's ideas in the West?
Shall we collect a few questions?
Yes, we can collect a few questions, if any other. Otherwise, start with this first question and then see. Okay, please.
Oh, there's one.
There is one, okay.
Hi, my name is Leonardo Di Girolamo, and I wanted to ask you a more specific question on the Belt and Road Initiative. Specifically, I was wondering how the news about, for example, Italy first joining and then leaving the project, and more in general, how the opinion that Western countries are giving on the Belt and Road Initiative and the speculations about what's the point of this project made by China, how are these opinions perceived in China, how are these news filtered, and what's the Chinese opinion on this Western criticism or support? Thank you.
Any other? Yes, one there, please.
I'm Fulco Ferraris from the University of Turin, and my question is also related to the Belt and Road Initiative. So I was thinking of how the initiative is mostly thought of as a trade initiative, but I was also thinking, do you personally think that China is using the initiative as a way to, let's say, export its developmental paradigm and sort of to become a norm setter in the international system, or do you think that China is mostly aiming at trade and then maybe as a consequence, maybe sort of have, yes, as I said, become a norm setter in that sort of sense? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So for the first question, soft power, that has been troubling me as well. I wish I had the answer, because I think I've been a director, a UK director of Confucius Institute as well in the UK, and we did a lot of activities. And as you know, Confucius Institute is also under scrutiny in a number of countries in the US. There were over 100 Confucius Institutes, and now there are 5 in Belgium. None of them exist anymore. In the UK, only one, I think, right? One or two, but they are associations, they are not within the universities anymore. And in Italy, I didn't check the status, but certainly, how to make China sexy? That's the question I ask myself. Because if you look at the different, contemporary China, I can see, because I just came back from China, I find it very sexy. In the way that, the digital economy it's amazing. You can order anything to your home, to your, the speed and the new way of doing business digitally, it's really, much faster than Australia and Europe than I've been to, The trains, you can see the Chinese high-speed trains, it's really amazing, And even the games, like, Japanese have manga, but China has the very good digital games. I don't play games, but I've been told the recent new Black Monkey, some and it's very popular. So there's some important, kind of new wave of creative industry, technologies, and others. Why China is not sexy? I mean, I ask myself, I think some people say it's to do with the lack of information about China, of what happened in China. So the government is now giving the visa-free travel for a number of European countries, including Italy, Belgium, and France, and others. And I have colleagues going there who say, they can discover themselves. Some people it's to do with media reporting, and for EU they say now China limits so few foreign correspondents. We don't have news, about China or positive news, So we want more. If China allow more journalists, we can maybe report more real China. And some, say it's maybe to do with the political system, different political values that may have changed the perception. But certainly, I mean, for me, I just think this is a concern, and I just think we need to create more dialogues and more opportunities for young people to go to China and to see China itself. And I'm relatively new back in China, but I just think China, for the West or for outside world, it's a very uniform image, while it is very fragmented. I went to the city of Dunhuang very recently, and the city is in the west part of China, the starting point of ancient Silk Road. The way of living, the local environment, the food, etc., is very different from Hangzhou, where I live. So it's different, totally different. So we tend to talk about a uniform China, while we can see it's very mosaic in terms of China. So I don't have an answer. I've been trying to actually ask all of my friends every time. I said, what can be done to make it more attractive, more sexy? So if any of you have some good ideas, some people say we need to invite more influencers to China to make it more known. So I will welcome that. The Belt and Road Initiative, thank you very much. This is a very important initiative, obviously, and we can see that the cancellation of Italy, but this is not new in the way that when I was in Victoria, in Australia, the state of Victoria had also an agreement with China on Belt and Road Initiative, and that was the center of attention for Australian federal government. And when they introduced the Foreign Relations Bill, which allows or asks the federal government to review all of its foreign cooperative agreements, and the BR initiative or agreement between the state of Victoria with China was cancelled as well. Some people say it's directly linked to the new law, some people say it's not, but what we hear, what we see is BR is becoming more of a way kind of initiative rather than a strong kind of systematic approach. It's more bottom-up now, rather than top-down. I think it's being played down. And also, we see that it's also an initiative or a concept which is introduced not only to the BR immediate neighborhood, but to remote areas as well. So, what I think, what China needed to do, and I also quoted a speaker that I invited a few years ago, Catherine Ashton. I invited her to go to Lancaster University to give a talk. And she used a very interesting phrase saying that EU-China can become critical friends. So meaning that you can be friends, but also you can provide criticism of each other. So, and you need to adapt that in a good way. So I think all of this cancellation, all these concerns are very important, and we need to look at them in a way. We need to look at them realistically, but also look at them in the fair lens to whether there are misconceptions we need to correct, whether there are policy change we need to adapt, but do not take it like it used to be, like a lose of face or shame. I think those parties have moved forwards. On the last one, whether BRI is a trade issue or it's beyond, I think obviously it goes beyond trade. When it was first launched, it's to do with trade, it's to do with infrastructure, it's to do with policy coordination and governance cooperation. So certainly, this is an important way for China not only doing trade, but also doing policy coordination. And And that is also why I introduced in my slide, EU is also having different initiatives like Global Gateway and some others to, I wouldn't say counterbalance, but also to provide an alternative. And I think the policy is far-reaching, it covers different areas, but as I said, it's more bottom-up through the membership of BNI countries, through the countries who are interested involved in BI. So it's bottom-up, more bottom-up rather than top-down.
Thank you. Second round, if any. Yes, please. Please wait for the microphone.
Thank you. The question just came up now while you were talking. It's always about the Belt and Road Initiative, and in particular about the US and China. Do you think they can actually find some area of field of cooperation within the framework of BRI? And I don't know, maybe in sectors such as energy or technology, something like that. Thank you.
Yes, please. Question from Argentina directly.
Thank you very much for your exposition. I'm Celeste from Argentina, Buenos Aires, Universidad 3 de Febrero. And I would like to ask to you how important is for China nowadays the countries of the Global South, especially Latin American countries. It's another question not from the UN.
Other questions? Yes.
Yeah, my name is Vedant and I am from India. And I would like to ask you about the Thucydides trap, if you know about it. The current geopolitical world is in a dilemma of Thucydides trap, that US is already a global power and China is a rising power. Economically, China is doing very well. And how do you think that behind China, India is also coming? So how do you think that in the same region we have Russia, China, India, these three nations together, and another side USA? So what kind of trap it is going to be?
Other questions? Otherwise we can close this second round. Okay, that's great.
I think the second one has a lot more bigger questions. Probably I need Jean-Michel, your help, and then Johan, your help in answering. So on the US and China relations, I have a colleague, Professor Song Xingying from Renmin University. He always said, US and China cannot be worse, the relation, and China and Europe can never be better. In the way that the relationship is as they are, in his view. And I certainly think that the new US election result will have very important implication, not only for US-China, but US-EU and the trilateral relations. The direction is hard to tell. And some scholars say, China prefers Trump because it is more straightforward rather than, the Harris. But I don't think it's that straightforward. And on US and China, I do think there are areas of collaboration. In the science and technology, for instance, even with the decoupling, we see the values of international collaboration in research and innovation. And China and US is, I didn't check the last statistic, but for the last few decades, or for the last 2-3 decades, it's the #1 scientific collaboration node in the world, nexus in the world. So US scientists, Chinese scientists, the joint publication between them are the #1 in the world. And they are the most highly cited papers, most influential papers in the scientific community. So we can see already that decoupling has very important impact on the scientific outputs. There's a decline of publication, decline of impact. So just for the common good, for our mankind, in terms of health, in terms of climate change, I do hope there will be scope for collaboration, but I must say the current situation is not that easy at the moment. On China and the Global South, and this is certainly an area China is really keen on, And we have now introduced, the government is really keen on global area studies and global South studies to understand better countries in the South, our neighboring countries is really important. And it has to do with India as well. And I just want to say that I feel personally very disappointing that India and China do not have enough exchange. We have a lot of students from Africa in China, for instance, but I haven't checked the number of students from India. I think that's quite limited compared to some other nations. And it's really important that we need to have this regional knowledge and competencies about each other to have a better way forward in the biological ties. And obviously it's not helping because I think the visa now, it's really hard to get a visa to India and vice versa. So I hope this Global South collaboration will also mean more investment in understanding each other, understanding and have more people-to-people mobility. But certainly, South-to-South collaboration is a very important policy area China is focusing. China just recently had the China-Africa Summit, which has been running for many years now, and it's going to continue, and I'm sure there will be more global South collaboration platforms coming up from China. And the last question was sorry, I think it's about the atrocity trap, right?
Yeah.
I personally find it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, how it is being written and how the future. In China, we often say that you have, you are the, how do you say, 10 years on the, right, 10 years on the left of the river, 10 years on the right bank of the river, meaning that the tide turns. You could be number one 10 years, another decade you will be, second. So I don't think it's a zero-sum game between, the leading actors. I think we need to adapt to this power sharing, power collaboration rather than the more unilateral way that we were used to in the past decades. So I do hope we can find the collaboration avenues among the global partners and learn to adapt, sharing the powers. It's a good question. I don't have the answer for that, but certainly we'll welcome the discussion afterwards.
Basically, it was just the competition at the race to become a power, and USA is already sitting there and controlling the load.
Yeah.
Even in the South China Sea, Indian Ocean, Pacific Ocean, USA is like having a load more. But China is also trying to come against maybe through Belt and Road Initiative, and we have been, Asia have been a victim of a proxy wars of USA, Western world, so many times in the history, Vietnam War, Korean War, like so many communism versus democracy. So how do we say today in the current geopolitical era, China, Russia, India, these three in the same region?
Yeah, I think, and Europe, by the way. Yeah.
So it's pretty more conflict and going to be very critical time if we see rising powers.
Okay, so I think that our time is over, so we are perfectly on time.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much, Professor Wei Shen, for coming.